There's a certain stillness that exists in an apartment building at night. It's not silence, not really. Silence doesn't exist in a place where pipes groan and heaters rattle, where unseen tenants cough through thin walls and footsteps travel like whispers between floors. But there's a particular weight to it. It's the sound of people sleeping, of lives paused, of doors locked and blinds pulled shut. My apartment was on the 7th floor, tucked at the very end of a long, narrow hallway. The carpet in that hall was old, once burgundy, but now the color of dried rust, threadbare at the edges. The walls were an indifferent beige, and if you looked close enough, you could see faint handprints in the paint where people had leaned over the years, steadying themselves with groceries or boxes. I'd moved in during winter, when the nights stretched on endlessly. The apartment itself was nothing special. 2 rooms, a bathroom, and a kitchen that smelled faintly of old wood no matter how much bleach I used. It was the door, though, that always unsettled me. Not because of how it looked, just an ordinary dull brown wooden door with peeling edges around the peephole, but because of how it sounded. Whenever I shut it, no matter the time of day, the sound always echoed louder than I expected, as though the hall itself swallowed it and sent it back. A hollow boom that lingered too long in my ears. I thought maybe it was just the way the building was built, thin walls, cavernous corridors, the kind of place where noise never really ended but stretched itself, bending and folding, long after the source was gone. I didn't notice the knocking until my 3rd week living there. At first, it was faint. A single tap, so soft I wasn't sure if I'd imagined it. It came late, past midnight, when I sat on my couch with only the lamp lit beside me, reading to keep myself awake. The sound was small enough that it blended into the hum of the radiator, into the clicks of settling wood. I thought maybe a neighbor had stumbled into the wrong door, maybe drunk, maybe tired. But then it happened again, a little louder this time. 2 taps, measured, deliberate. I set my book down and waited. No voice followed, no shuffle of feet walking away. Just silence. The longer I listened, the heavier it felt, like the air itself was leaning in on me. I finally stood, crept to the peephole, and pressed my eye against it. Nothing. The hallway stretched empty, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. I waited there, holding my breath, convinced something would move in the edge of my vision. Nothing ever did. I told myself to ignore it, that people knock on the wrong doors all the time, that the sound of pipes can be deceiving. But the knocking returned, always at night, always past midnight. Sometimes a single knock, sometimes 3, evenly spaced like the rhythm of a heart. I grew familiar with the texture of it, the dull thud of knuckles against old wood, deep and resonant, too controlled to be random. And it wasn't just that the knocking came, it was that the door knocked back. It was a night in February when I tested it. I just heard the usual 3 knocks, steady and deliberate, and something inside me, curiosity, maybe madness, compelled me to lift my own hand. I pressed my knuckles gently to the door and tapped once. I waited. From the other side, after a pause that stretched too long, came a single answering knock. I froze, my skin crawling, my chest tightening as though the air had thickened around me. It wasn't loud, but it was precise. A response. I tried again. 2 knocks this time, sharper, faster. The answer came again. 2 knocks, identical in pace and tone. The sound didn't echo down the hall, didn't feel like it came from someone passing by. It felt closer, as though the wood itself carried it, as though the door was hollow and something inside it was returning my signals. I didn't sleep that night. After that, the knocks became more insistent. They no longer waited for me to test them. Sometimes they would begin softly, then grow louder, rattling the frame, as if whoever, or whatever, stood on the other side was growing impatient. I would sit in the living room, paralyzed, staring at the door, my ears straining for any shift in sound. The strangest part was that no one else seemed to hear it. I asked the neighbor across the hall, an older woman with tired eyes, if anyone had been wandering at night, knocking on doors. She shook her head, said the hallway was always quiet after dark. I started to notice things inside my apartment, too. The air would feel colder near the door, as though winter leaked through even when the heater worked. Sometimes faintly, I thought I smelled something, damp earth, or the faint iron tang of rust. And once, while staring through the peephole, I thought I saw movement. Not a person, not really, but a ripple of shadow like heat rising off asphalt. It vanished when I blinked. I began avoiding the door altogether after dark. I'd turn on the television to drown out the sound, but no matter how loud I set it, I could always feel the vibration of those knocks in the floorboards in my chest. It escalated one night around 3 in the morning. I'd fallen asleep on the couch when a violent pounding tore me awake. Not the measured knocks I'd grown used to. This was frantic, aggressive, shaking the door in its frame. My first thought was that something terrible had happened, that someone needed help. But when I reached the peephole, the hallway was empty. Still, the knocking didn't stop. It went on, relentless, like a storm. I backed away, heart hammering, my body trembling. The longer it continued, the more wrong it felt. It didn't sound like fists anymore. It sounded heavier, meatier, as though something was striking with the flat of its hand, or worse, with something not quite human. Then it stopped. Just as suddenly as it began, silence fell. I stood there, paralyzed, staring at the door when slowly, deliberately, 3 slow knocks pressed back from the other side. Boom, boom, boom. Each one deeper than the last, echoing not through the hallway but through me. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. It was as though the door itself had a heartbeat, as though something beyond it was alive and aware of me. I don't remember falling asleep, but I must have. When I woke, daylight streamed through the blinds, and the apartment was ordinary again. The door stood still and silent, just wood and metal and peeling paint. But from that night forward, I knew the truth. Something was there. It wasn't a neighbor. It wasn't coincidence. It was waiting, always on the other side, listening. And sometimes, when I'm tired enough, when the building is at its quietest, I still test it. I knock once, softly, like a child afraid of waking something. And without fail, it always knocks back. I should have ignored it. I should have kept walking past that hallway, past that door, and past that sound. But curiosity has always been my downfall, and what I heard that night inside the rotting veins of that roadside motel still clings to me. Like mildew on old wallpaper, like dust that never leaves the lungs. The place was already unsettling before the knocking started. It was the kind of motel you pull into when you're too tired to care. The neon sign sputtered like a dying insect, humming and buzzing in the darkness, throwing off just enough light to reveal the cracked pavement and oil stains that looked more like shadows than spills. A pale blue glow bled from the flickering letters, VAC NCY, the missing bulb forever promising shelter to anyone desperate enough to believe it. The air smelled stale, like wet carpet and rusting pipes. The breeze carried something sour, almost metallic, as though the entire building had been steeped in rot and forgotten by time. I remember thinking it felt less like a motel, and more like a waiting room for something I couldn't quite name. I checked in at the front desk. The man behind the counter hardly looked at me. His face was gray with exhaustion, his eyes hidden in the shadow of a baseball cap. His voice was flat, barely audible over the hum of the buzzing light above us. He slid the key across the counter, an actual metal key with a cracked plastic tag that read room 12. The numbers rubbed almost to nothing. The hallway was narrow and too long, like it stretched farther than the building should have allowed. The carpeting under my feet was threadbare, squishy in spots from water damage, and every step released a faint, damp odor. The walls were yellowed from decades of smoke, dotted with stains whose origins I didn't want to guess. Each ceiling light glowed a weak orange, surrounded by halos of moths that had died mid-flight and clung there, their brittle bodies locked in place. I passed several doors, each numbered with tarnished brass plaques. They all looked the same, heavy wood painted over too many times, peeling in thick layers. Some doors had deep scratches around the handles, as if someone had clawed at them in desperation. I told myself it was just age, just wear and tear from countless guests over the years. But the deeper I went, the less it felt like anyone had actually stayed there in decades. My room was near the end of the hall. I pushed open the door, and it resisted, swollen from dampness. The smell hit me first, a pungent mixture of bleach that couldn't hide the undertones of mold. Inside, everything felt slightly wrong. The bedspread was patterned with faded flowers, stiff with age. The air conditioner rattled without blowing air, coughing dust whenever I tried to adjust it. A single lamp buzzed on the nightstand, its shade tilting as though it had been crushed and bent back into place. The silence in that room wasn't empty silence. It was thick, weighted, as though the air itself pressed in on me. It felt like being buried under a heavy blanket, but one that carried the faint static charge of dread. I tried to tell myself it was just exhaustion, just the unease of being in a strange place at night. I unpacked nothing, left my bag by the door, and lay down on the stiff mattress, still in my clothes. That's when the knocking started. It was faint at first, a soft, deliberate tap. Not on my door, but one further down the hall. 3 knocks, evenly spaced. Then silence. I froze, listening, holding my breath so I wouldn't miss the next sound. And there it was again. 3 knocks. Then nothing. It should have been ordinary. Someone visiting another guest. Someone drunk, maybe. Someone confused about which room was theirs. But I knew better, because I had passed that door when I walked in. Room 10, the one just 2 down from mine. Its number plate had been missing, leaving only the faint outline of tarnish where it used to be. And I remembered the desk clerk's words when I had asked which rooms were available. He had said, without hesitation, only 12. I remember that because of the way he said it, not like there was only one room left, but like there was only one room he was willing to give me. So why was someone knocking on an empty door? The sound came again, this time louder. A hollow, almost eager rapping, like knuckles against wood that had long since dried and warped. The air in my room seemed to shift when it happened, the way it does when someone walks past you, except no one was there. I sat up slowly, the mattress springs groaning beneath me. Every instinct told me not to open my door, to stay inside, to wait until morning. But curiosity is cruel, and dread only sharpens it. I crept toward the door, pressing my ear against it, straining to hear through the muffled walls of that decaying building. 3 knocks. Closer this time. More urgent. The sound didn't come from the far door anymore. It echoed right outside, in the hall, like it had moved. And yet, I didn't hear footsteps. No creak of the carpet. Just the sudden displacement of sound from one point to another. I held my breath again. The air smelled stronger now, stagnant, heavy, like wet concrete after a storm. My skin prickled as though the temperature had dropped several degrees in seconds. Silence stretched out, and then 3 more knocks, this time against my door. I stumbled back, my heart thundering so loudly I swore it would give me away. The sound wasn't forceful, wasn't violent, but it was insistent, like someone asking, politely but firmly, to be let in. I wanted to believe it was another guest, but there was no mistaking the hollowness of that sound. It wasn't the sharp rap of a visitor. It was slower, more deliberate. Each knock lingered in the wood, as though it had soaked into the grain. I didn't move. I didn't answer. And after what felt like forever, the knocking stopped. But the silence that followed was worse. Because silence in a place like that isn't empty, it's listening. It's waiting. I backed away from the door, sat on the edge of the bed, and tried to steady my breathing. My eyes scanned the room for something, anything, I could use as comfort. But the room offered nothing. Only that dim lamp, the buzzing air conditioner, and the sense that I wasn't as alone as I had been led to believe. The night stretched on. I don't remember when I lay back down, or how long I stared at the ceiling. But I remember the sound that woke me again. 3 knocks. From inside the wall behind my bed. The sound was softer now, muffled, like someone was knocking from a space just beyond the thin plaster. Slow, patient, not demanding, not aggressive, but steady, waiting for acknowledgement. I pressed my hand to the wall, and it was cold, colder than it should have been. The plaster almost seemed to hum beneath my palm, like something alive pulsed inside it. I didn't sleep. Not that night. Not after that. I sat there until the pale light of morning crept through the filthy curtains, coloring the room a dull gray. The knocking never came again once the sun rose. When I checked out, the clerk didn't look at me. He just took the key and slid it back under the counter, his movements rehearsed, mechanical. I wanted to ask about room 10, about the knocking, about what I had heard inside the wall. But I didn't. His silence felt like an answer I wasn't meant to survive. I drove away that morning, the motel shrinking in my rearview mirror until it disappeared into the horizon. But sometimes in the dead of night, when the world is quiet enough, I still hear it. 3 knocks. Slow, patient, waiting, and I know wherever I am, it remembers me. It began in silence, the kind of silence that feels thicker than air, as though the world outside had decided to mute itself. No cars passed, no neighbors made noise, and the house seemed swallowed in a stillness so absolute that every creak of wood and every shift of the air pressed against my ears like an intrusive whisper. The closet was just a closet. At least, that's what I told myself. For panels of old painted wood, yellowed at the edges with time, tucked into the corner of the bedroom. The kind with doors that folded inward, meeting in the middle with a seam so thin you could run your finger down it and feel the splintered edge of paint. It had always been there since I moved in, sitting quietly like a sealed box of things I didn't want to disturb. That night the air in the room had a strange weight. Not warm, not cold, but heavy, like a damp cloth had been draped over everything. I noticed the smell first. A faint odor, almost metallic, like wet iron. It came and went with the faintest movements of the air, curling around my nose, then disappearing as if retreating back to wherever it came from. I had been lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, letting the darkness blur into shapes. The only light came from the street lamp outside, fractured through blinds into thin bands that stretched across the carpet and up the walls. I remember following those lines with my eyes, half drifting into sleep, when a sound broke through. It was small, a shift, the wooden groan of something that had no reason to move. My eyes slid toward the corner of the room, where the closet stood. At first, nothing seemed different. The panels were closed, the seam straight, the shadow along it steady. But the sound hadn't come from anywhere else. I held my breath, straining to hear past the pounding of my own heart. The silence pressed back, waiting. And then faintly, too faint to mistake, it came again. A soft click, like wood adjusting under pressure. But it wasn't the house settling. I had lived there long enough to know the rhythm of its sighs and cracks. This was different. This was deliberate. I sat up, every part of me unwilling yet compelled to look closer. The bands of streetlight reached just far enough to touch the closet doors, casting pale stripes across their surface. That's when I saw it. The seam between the doors wasn't straight anymore. It had shifted. A hairline gap ran down the middle, no wider than the edge of a coin, but wide enough for the darkness inside to bleed through. The sight of it stole the air from my chest. The doors had been shut tight, flush against each other. Now they weren't. I told myself it could have been air pressure, old wood warping, a draft I hadn't noticed. But the smell in the room grew stronger, thickening into something sour, metallic, and wrong. And with it came a sound, faint but undeniable, like the brush of fabric against wood, something shifting inside the closet. I wanted to look away. My body screamed to turn over, pull the blanket over my head, pretend I hadn't seen. But my eyes locked onto that thin crack, and I couldn't tear them away. My imagination filled it with things, shapes leaning forward, faces too close, waiting just behind the wood. The gap widened, not all at once, but with a slow, dragging groan. The right-hand door edged outward, barely an inch, then stilled. My skin prickled as if the air itself had teeth pressing against me. Something was moving the door. The smell by then was unbearable, clinging to the back of my throat like rust and damp earth. My heartbeat thundered so hard I thought the noise would betray me. I sat frozen, every muscle locked, waiting for whatever had pushed that door to step forward into the bands of light. But nothing came, only the silence. The closet stood half open now, the crack wide enough to see inside. Not everything, just slivers, fabric shapes of hanging coats, a line of shadows too dark to belong to anything I owned. And in that dark, I could have sworn something shifted again. Not the door this time, but something within. A subtle sway, as though something inside had leaned back, melting deeper into the dark, hiding from the light. My throat was dry, painful when I swallowed. The thought of crossing the room, of touching that door, felt impossible. Yet the idea of sitting and waiting was worse. I needed to know if I was losing my mind, or if something had crawled into my house and taken its place in that closet. I slid from the bed, slow enough that the springs didn't groan beneath me. The carpet felt damp under my bare feet, though I knew it couldn't be. Every step toward the closet dragged like a punishment. The shadows shifted as I approached, the bands of light warping across the door, and I swore the air grew colder the closer I got. When I reached it, the gap seemed wider than before, wide enough that if I wanted, I could press my face to it and see inside. But I didn't want to see. I couldn't. The smell poured from that crack, heavy and suffocating, making my stomach twist. The silence inside wasn't empty. It had weight, like something breathing too softly to be heard. I lifted a hand. My fingers hovered just above the wood, trembling. All I needed to do was push, to prove it was nothing, that the warped door had slipped loose, that my imagination had built the rest. But before my hand could make contact, the door shuddered against itself, jerked inward, as though something had yanked it from within. I staggered back, stumbling against the bed frame. The door stopped halfway, gaping open, exposing the dark inside. My clothes hung still, pale stripes of fabric barely visible in the dim light. But between them, where the dark was thickest, something waited. I didn't see eyes. I didn't see a face. But I felt it. The way the silence wrapped tighter, the way my skin rose in waves of cold. The awareness that something was aware of me. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Then, from the heart of that darkness, the faintest sound reached me. Not a growl, not a whisper, just the slow drag of fingernails along wood. The closet door trembled, as though whatever was inside had pressed against it again, testing, waiting. I backed away, inch by inch, until the edge of the mattress hit the back of my legs. I climbed onto it, never taking my eyes from that open crack. The smell was unbearable now, flooding the room, sinking into my skin. The door moved once more. Not fully closed, not fully open. Just a twitch, a reminder, and then nothing. The silence returned, heavy and complete. I sat awake until the first gray light of morning crawled across the room. Only then did the smell fade. Only then did the door stand still, as if it had never moved at all. But I know what I saw. I know what I felt. And every night since, I've watched that closet, waiting, listening. Because it wasn't the house settling, and it wasn't my imagination. That door moved on its own. And something inside moved with it. It always began the same way. A silence that felt too heavy for the hour, like the world itself was holding its breath. And then the sound, soft, deliberate, and undeniable. 3 knocks. Always at 3 a.m. At first, I thought it was something explainable. A neighbor. A trick of old wood expanding in the cold. The wind carrying sounds in strange ways. I've given myself every excuse possible over the years, but the truth is something I can't put into neat words. Something I don't want to accept. Because no matter where I go, no matter how far I move, the knocking finds me. The first time it happened, I was still living in my childhood home. It was a 1-story house with yellowing walls, the kind that always smelled faintly of dust and damp insulation. The floorboards creaked even when nobody walked on them. At night, it felt like the house held onto every sound and every smell, trapping them inside its aging lungs. I was 13 when I heard it for the first time. My bedroom was at the far end of the hallway, past the bathroom and across from the utility closet. I'd fallen asleep late, staring at the glow of the alarm clock on my nightstand. When the noise came, it woke me instantly. 3 knocks. Not loud, not aggressive, just placed, like someone gently testing the surface of a coffin. My bedroom door rattled in its frame from the vibration, though the air was still. I remember sitting up, listening. My mouth was dry, but my skin was slick with sweat that hadn't been there before. The house was quiet. Too quiet. Not even the refrigerator hummed. I thought maybe it was my father coming home late from work, knocking by mistake. But the sound hadn't come from the front door. It came from inside, from my own bedroom door. When I finally gathered the courage to get up, I opened it slowly, expecting to see someone standing there. The hallway stretched empty. The yellow carpet looked darker than usual in the shadows. The utility closet door across from me was shut tight. I told myself I'd imagined it, that I'd dreamt the whole thing. But at 3 o'clock the next morning, it happened again. 3 slow, deliberate knocks against the wood of my bedroom door. It became a pattern. Always at 3 a.m. Always the same number of knocks. Always waiting for me, no matter how much I tried to prepare myself. I never opened the door fast enough to catch it. The hallway was always empty. Years passed before I finally left that house. When I moved into my first apartment, I thought the knocks would stop. I was an adult now, far away from the creaking, suffocating rooms of my childhood home. For a while, I believed I had left it behind, until one night I woke to silence, a silence too deep for a city apartment. The air felt heavy again, and the smell of old dust filled my lungs. I turned toward the door. 3 knocks. They were softer this time, as if testing me, as if reminding me it had never gone away. I froze in bed, my eyes fixed on the thin slice of shadow beneath the doorframe. Nothing moved, but I could feel something on the other side. I didn't sleep the rest of that night, and when 3 a.m. came again the following night, so did the knocking. It never mattered where I went after that. I moved apartments. I rented houses. I even spent a few months staying with friends, sleeping on couches. Each time, the knocks came back, always at the same hour, always 3 times, always at the door closest to where I lay. I began to notice details. The sound wasn't hollow like a person's knuckles. It was denser, almost like stone tapping on wood. It left no marks, no scratches, no dents, just sound. But the vibrations carried through the floor, up through the walls, into my bones. Worse still was the feeling that accompanied it. The air just before the knocks always shifted. It grew stale, pressing against my lungs, coating my tongue with a metallic tang, like rust mixed with ash. My skin prickled as if unseen fingers hovered just above it. Over time, I stopped opening the door. At first, I used to try, swinging it open, rushing into empty hallways, checking every closet and window. But no matter how fast I moved, there was nothing to see. Only the stillness, heavier after each knock. It wasn't long before I realized it didn't matter if I opened the door or not. The knocking was never about who, or what, stood outside. It was about reminding me. The worst experience came when I finally bought a house of my own. I thought permanence would make me stronger, that if I claimed a space as mine, I could stand against it. The house was small, tucked into a wooded area with a gravel driveway. The nights there were darker than anywhere I'd lived before. No streetlights, no neighbors in shouting distance. Just the sound of trees creaking in the wind and the occasional scurry of something across the roof. The first night I slept there, I already knew it would come. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the smell of the forest drifting faintly through the windows. The silence thickened at exactly 2:59. My stomach turned cold, my ears ringing with that unnatural hush. Then it came. 3 knocks. But this time, they weren't at the bedroom door. They were on the window. The glass trembled, though no breeze stirred outside. The knocks were too measured, too intentional. Something stood on the other side of that window, tapping as if to remind me there was no escape. I didn't move. I couldn't. My body had gone rigid, my heartbeat slamming against my ribs, so hard I thought the sound alone would draw it closer. The knocks didn't repeat. It never knocked more than 3 times. But the presence lingered. For hours, I felt it there just beyond the glass. Watching, the nights that followed grew worse. Sometimes it was the door, sometimes the window, sometimes both. Once, I swear I heard it at the ceiling above me, like it had climbed onto the roof, waiting for me to come outside. I don't remember when I stopped trying to live normally. Sleep became something I avoided. Friends noticed the change in me, the shadows under my eyes, the way I flinched at sudden noises. but I never told them. How could I explain something like this without sounding insane? Even now, as I write this, I feel it pressing close. The air in my room grows stale around the same hour every night. I don't need a clock to know when it's coming. My body knows. My skin knows. 3 knocks. It has followed me for years. From house to house. From childhood to adulthood. From doors to windows to walls. I used to think if I ignored it long enough, it might stop. But the truth is, it doesn't want to be ignored. It wants me to know it's there. It always has. And deep down, I think it's waiting for me to finally open the door. Because when I do, I don't think it will knock anymore. It's strange, the way silence can turn heavy when you're alone in the dark. I used to think quiet meant safety, that when the world outside my room stopped moving, when the streets grew empty and the air settled, it was a sign everything was fine. But I know now that silence can also be a warning. It can mean something is waiting for you, lingering just out of sight, hiding behind the stillness. I was living in a small house at the time, nothing special. It was an old place that creaked more than I liked, a place where the wooden floor groaned under every step and the walls carried whispers of movement long after you had stopped walking. My room was upstairs, facing the back of the property where trees grew close, their branches tangled like fingers pressing against the night sky. During the day it was peaceful, birds chirping, leaves swaying with the wind. But at night, those same trees became silhouettes that pressed in too close to the glass. I had been in that room for only a few weeks when it first happened. It was late, somewhere past 2 a.m., that strange hour when your body doesn't feel tired anymore, but your mind is heavy, swimming in that limbo between wakefulness and sleep. I had my lamp turned off, the faint glow of the streetlight outside barely reaching through the blinds. The air smelled stale, like old dust clinging to fabric, mixed with the faint dampness of wood that never quite dried from the rain. I remember how still it was. The kind of stillness where even the hum of the refrigerator downstairs seemed absent, where every little creak from the house stretched long and hollow. That was when I heard it. A knock. Not on the door. Not from downstairs. It came from the window. My window on the second floor. The sound was subtle, almost careful, like the deliberate tap of a finger. Not loud, not forceful. Just enough to stir me from the edge of sleep. At first, I thought I had imagined it. I stared at the blinds, frozen in my bed, waiting for it to repeat. My heart slowed, then quickened again, every beat echoing in my chest as the silence stretched on. Then it came again. Tap, tap, tap. Soft, slow, deliberate. I remember the way my skin prickled, the way the hair on my arms stood straight, as if my body knew something I didn't. There was no balcony outside my window, no ledge wide enough for someone to stand on. Just the thin siding of the house and the drop to the backyard below. Even if someone had climbed the trees, the branches didn't quite reach all the way to the glass. Whoever, or whatever, was there had no business being able to touch it. I didn't move at first. I couldn't. My breathing felt too loud in the silence, too heavy, as though if I exhaled too quickly it might draw attention to me. I stared at the thin blinds, faintly glowing with the weak streetlight beyond, expecting to see a shadow, the outline of a hand, a face pressed too close. But there was nothing, just stillness. The tapping stopped after the third knock, leaving me in a silence so deep I could hear my own pulse in my ears. I didn't dare move to check. Instead, I pulled the blanket tighter, trying to convince myself it had been the house settling, a loose branch brushing against the glass. Some rational explanation my mind was too clouded to piece together. But even as I forced myself to believe it, a part of me knew it hadn't been the house. That sound, it was too precise, too human. The next morning I checked. I pulled the blinds open, staring at the glass, expecting maybe to see smudges, handprints, anything. There was nothing, just the faint reflection of myself, pale and anxious in the daylight. I told myself it was nothing, a one-time thing, the mind playing tricks on a tired body. But it wasn't, because it happened again, and again, always around the same time. Always soft, always deliberate. Tap, Tap, tap. The second time, I tried to stay awake. I lay in bed with the lamp on, the dim yellow light throwing shadows across the walls, waiting to see if it would come back. I remember how oppressive the room felt then, the air thick and unmoving, the faint scent of wood and dust pressing against my senses. Hours slipped by, each minute dragging, my eyelids growing heavier. And then, just as my body surrendered to drowsiness, tap, tap, tap. I shot upright, my heart hammering so hard it hurt. The lamp light didn't help. It only made me more aware of the shadows, of the way the corners of the room seemed darker than they should be. I couldn't bring myself to get up. I didn't want to get close to the window. I just sat there in bed, gripping the sheets, staring at the blinds like if I looked away, something might slip inside. The knocks stopped again, just as they had before. No more than 3. Always 3. By the third week, I was no longer convincing myself it was nothing. I knew there was something outside that window, something aware of me, something that wanted me to know it was there. I tried ignoring it, pulling the blanket over my head when the knocks came, but that made it worse. Because in the darkness beneath the blanket, the sound was louder, closer, as though it was no longer outside at all. One night, I finally broke. Curiosity, fear, exhaustion, whatever it was, I needed to know. I needed to see. The clock had just struck 3:10 when it happened again. Tap, tap, tap. My hands shook as I reached for the blinds. Every muscle in my body screamed at me to stop, to just stay still, to pretend none of it was real. But something in me pushed forward anyway. I lifted a single slat of the blind, just enough to peek through. The backyard stretched out beneath the pale orange glow of the streetlight. The trees were still, their branches unmoving. The grass glistened faintly with dew. Everything was silent, empty, but there was no one there. No one on the ground. No one pressed against the glass. And yet, I swear, just before I let the blind fall back into place, I saw it. A shape. Not on the ground, not in the trees, but in the reflection. Behind me. Something standing in the room, just over my shoulder. The blinds snapped shut before I could see clearly, before I could confirm what it was. I didn't dare look back. I sat frozen in place, my chest tightening, the air in the room growing unbearably heavy. I could feel it, something there just behind me watching. I didn't turn. I didn't move until the first gray light of morning crept through the cracks in the blinds. And even then, when I finally forced myself to glance back, the room was empty. But the feeling wasn't gone. The tapping never stopped after that. It followed me, even when I tried sleeping downstairs, even when I stayed at a friend's house. Always 3 knocks, always against glass, a reminder that it knew where I was, that it could reach me no matter where I went. Sometimes I think about opening the window, about letting it in, just to end the waiting, the not knowing. But deep down, I know that's exactly what it wants. And I don't know what will happen when I finally give in. But I can tell you this. If you ever hear someone knocking on your window in the middle of the night, especially if you're on the 2nd floor, don't look, don't answer, because once you do, it'll never stop. Grief changes the way you hear silence. After my grandfather's funeral, I thought the hardest part would be the hollow ache in my chest, the kind of emptiness that doesn't go away even when people surround you with food, condolences, and polite smiles. But I was wrong. The hardest part came later, when the house quieted down, when relatives went back to their own homes and their own lives, when I returned to mine and found that silence had followed me there. It wasn't the kind of silence you long for. It wasn't rest or peace. It was a silence that pressed on the walls, as if the air itself was holding its breath, waiting for something. The first night I returned home after the burial, I couldn't sleep. The funeral smell had followed me. Flowers wilting in damp air, the cloying sweetness of lilies turning sour the way they always do when they've been sitting too long. I could swear I still smelled the faint bitter tang of formaldehyde on my clothes, even though I had showered twice. My body felt clean, but the air didn't. I lay in bed with the curtains drawn. The window near my head let in a dim band of light from the street lamp outside, breaking across the room like a sickly yellow scar. I closed my eyes and tried to let exhaustion pull me under, but that was when I heard it. A knock. Not loud, not even firm. It was soft, deliberate, like the tap of knuckles against wood held back by hesitation. It came from the hallway outside my bedroom. At first, I thought it was just the house settling. Old wood always moves at night. But this was no random creak, no groan of beams or pipes. It was 3 clear, soft knocks. And then nothing. The silence after it was worse than the sound. My chest grew tight, and I found myself staring at the door, waiting, straining my ears for anything else. But the air remained still. My own breath felt too loud in that moment. I forced myself to believe it was only grief playing tricks on me. I rolled onto my side, squeezed my eyes shut, and eventually drifted into a thin, restless sleep. The next night, it happened again. This time the knock came later, closer to 3 in the morning. 3 gentle knocks, perfectly spaced, tapping against wood. They came from the same place, right outside my door. I lay there, my skin prickling, every nerve alive and listening. I didn't move, not even to reach for the lamp. I was too afraid that the sound would come again if I acknowledged it. But it didn't. The house held its breath again, and the silence grew thick, heavy, almost damp in the air. It wasn't until the 3rd night that I realized something was wrong. The knocks didn't just return, they shifted. Instead of the hallway door, I heard them at the window. My 2nd-story window. I froze, every hair on my body standing up. The sound was faint, muffled by the glass, but unmistakable. 3 gentle knocks, slow and patient, as though someone were pressing their hand against the window and rapping their knuckles against the pane. I forced myself to look. The curtains were pulled halfway, the lamplight from outside painting dim shadows across the fabric. Nothing moved. No outline of a body, no shifting of branches. Just the faint yellow glow spilling through. But the sound had been real. That was the moment I felt the memory of my grandfather press close to me. Not the man himself, but the ritual of him. For as long as I could remember, whenever he came to visit my family's house, he never rang the doorbell. He would knock, 3 times, always the same way. Soft, polite, as though he didn't want to disturb the house. The realization lodged in my throat like ice. I didn't open the curtains. I couldn't. Instead, I lay still until morning came, when sunlight burned away the fragile film of night, and I could pretend nothing had happened. But the knocks didn't stop. Every night after that, they returned. Sometimes at the door, sometimes at the window. Always 3 knocks, always soft, always followed by silence that lingered like a presence, as if someone were waiting for me to respond. The more I ignored them, the worse it became. I started to notice other things. The faint smell of earth, like damp soil clinging to the bottom of shoes. A draft where there shouldn't have been one, carrying the cold, metallic scent of stone. And once, when I woke in the half-light before dawn, I saw the faint impression of handprints on the fogged glass of my window. Too high to be from anyone outside. They were on the inside. That was the first time I truly thought I was losing my mind. But grief is strange. It doesn't just make you sad. It changes what you believe is possible. At times, the knocks made me think it really was him. My grandfather, the only family member I had ever been close to, maybe trying to tell me something from the other side. Maybe just trying to let me know he wasn't gone. And sometimes, in my weakest moments, I wanted to answer. I wanted to open the door or pull back the curtain and whisper into the silence that I heard him, that I remembered him, that he could rest now. But I never did, because the knocks weren't always gentle. One night, the sound came harder. The knocks rattled the glass in my window, as though whoever stood there was growing impatient. The rhythm stayed the same, 3 knocks, but the pressure behind them had changed. No longer soft, no longer hesitant. They had weight, demanding. I pulled the blanket to my chin and stared at the shadowed curtains. The smell in the room grew stronger, not just soil now, but something else. A faint sour odor, like dried flowers gone rotten, like the inside of the funeral parlor. The air thickened, and I could barely draw a full breath. The silence afterward stretched for what felt like hours, but eventually, sleep took me, restless and broken. In the morning, when I finally opened the curtain, I saw something that froze me where I stood. 3 faint smudges on the glass. Not handprints, not quite fingerprints. Just dull, darkened patches where the condensation had been disturbed, shaped in a way that didn't look human. They were too long, too thin, as though something with stretched fingers had tapped there in the night. And that's when I knew. It wasn't my grandfather. The funeral might have been what drew it to me. The open wound of grief, the ritual of death, the way we call out to the dead in memory, even when we don't mean to. Something had heard me. Something had learned the sound of his knock. And now it was waiting for me to open the door. The knocks still come, almost every night. Sometimes at the door, sometimes at the window. Always 3 times. Always patient. Always followed by silence. I don't know what will happen if I answer. But some nights, when the silence grows too heavy and I smell the faintest trace of lilies rotting in the air, I wonder how much longer I can resist. The night was still when it began. I remember the air being heavier than usual, as though the walls themselves had been waiting for something. My house sat quiet around me, steeped in the silence that only comes when the world outside is asleep and the roads are nothing but dark veins stretching into nothingness. I was sitting alone, the glow of a dim lamp at my side, when the sound came. A knock. Not loud, not urgent, but sharp enough to fracture the stillness. It echoed against the front door, hollow and deliberate, like knuckles pressed firmly against wood. My body went rigid at once. The hour was late, far past midnight. Nobody should have been there. For a long moment, I didn't move. I only listened. My breath seemed too loud against the quiet, and I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen, the low ticking of the clock above the hallway. Then it came again, 3 measured knocks. Firm. Slow. Waiting. I rose, though every part of me told me not to. Each step across the floor felt too loud, too exposed. My skin prickled with the sensation of being watched, though no window was open, no curtain disturbed. The front door stood tall at the end of the hall, the brass handle gleaming faintly in the lamp's glow behind me. When I reached it, I hesitated. My hand hovered above the handle, the other pressed lightly against the cold surface of the wood. I could almost feel something on the other side, as though warmth or breath clung faintly to it. I turned the lock slowly, each click unnervingly loud. When the door swung open, the night outside spilled in, cool, damp, and empty. The yard stretched into darkness, the street lights casting weak circles that only seemed to emphasize the spaces they couldn't touch. There was nothing. No figure, no shadow lingering beyond the porch. But as I stood there, listening to the hollow quiet, the sound began again. Knocking. Not behind me inside. It came from somewhere deeper in the house. A dull, steady rapping that seemed to vibrate through the air itself. The kind of sound that carried through wood, through walls, until you couldn't tell where it started or where it would end. My stomach turned to ice. The open doorway yawned before me, but my instincts screamed not to leave. Somehow, stepping into the night felt safer than walking further inside. I closed the door. The sound did not stop. It was coming from the living room. Slow, deliberate knocks, echoing as though someone were rapping gently against furniture, or perhaps the wall itself. I walked carefully, every step sinking into the carpet with muted resistance, as though the floor wanted to trap me there. The living room lay ahead, dim, bathed only in the faint orange glow of a streetlight filtering through thin curtains. The knocking was clearer now. It seemed to come from the far wall. I approached, the hair on my arms rising with each sound. I expected to see something, a shadow, a trick of light, anything, but there was nothing. Only the blank wall, pale in the glow. I pressed my ear against it. The wood was cold. The knocking stopped. I stepped back. My breath trembled. And then, as if in answer to my movement, the sound began again, this time from the opposite side of the room. A knock, hollow and patient, like fingertips pressing against the wood of the cabinet that stood near the corner. I turned slowly. The cabinet loomed in the dimness, tall and old, its wooden doors slightly warped with age. The smell of dust and faint varnish lingered near it, a smell I hadn't noticed until then. The knocks came from within it, sharp and deliberate, like something trapped inside, waiting to be let out. I froze. The thought of opening it clawed at me, but so did the thought of ignoring it. My chest tightened with the weight of choice. And then it stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the sound. My ears strained for it, waiting, knowing it hadn't gone. I backed away, inch by inch, until my heel brushed against the hallway carpet. The air felt thicker, the dark corners of the house heavier, more aware. The knock came again, but now from behind me. It was faint at first. A soft rapping from the hallway closet door, just feet away. I spun, my eyes locking onto it. The thin wooden door trembled slightly with each sound, as if something pressed gently against it from the other side. I couldn't breathe. My hand trembled as I reached toward it, drawn by something I didn't understand. The door's surface was cold under my palm, colder than the air around it, as though it had been sitting in shadow for far longer than it should have. The knocking grew faster, more insistent. Not frantic, not violent, just patient, like it knew I would eventually give in. I pulled my hand back. I didn't open it. Instead, I stumbled backward, my chest tight, my vision trembling at the edges. The hallway stretched longer than it should have, shadows hanging too thick in the corners. I could hear the faint ticking of the clock again, but each tick sounded muffled, distant, as though swallowed by something unseen. And then the knocks came from everywhere. From the walls, from the floor, from the ceiling above. They moved, one after the other, circling, following, as though the entire house was alive with hollow sounds that pressed in closer and closer. My pulse pounded in my ears, my skin crawling with the awareness that no matter where I turned, the knocks would already be there waiting. I tried to run. My legs felt weak, unsteady, but I pushed forward, stumbling into the kitchen. The metallic scent of old pipes and the faint dampness of the sink hit me as I braced against the counter. For a brief moment, the knocking stopped, and then it came from directly beneath me. The floorboards groaned as though something shifted under them. A steady knock rising from beneath the house, so loud and so close that I could feel it reverberating up through my feet, into my bones. I backed away, but the knocking followed, chasing my steps, pounding from the floor just behind me as I moved. I fled into the bedroom, slamming the door shut behind me. The dark pressed in, heavy and suffocating. The air smelled of dust, the faint odor of wood polish lingering from old furniture. My hands shook as I pressed them against the door, waiting for the sound. For a long, agonizing moment, there was nothing. Just silence. And then, 3 soft knocks against the bedroom door. The sound vibrated through the wood, delicate but undeniable. My hands trembled against the surface, my heart hammering so hard it hurt. I wanted to scream, but no sound came. I wanted to open the door, but I knew what waited was not meant to be seen. I backed away slowly, step by step, until the edge of the bed pressed against me. The knocks came again, slow, steady, patient. Waiting. I don't remember how long I stood there. Minutes, hours, it blurred together into a haze of fear and silence. At some point, I must have fallen asleep, though the thought of sleep feels impossible. Because when I opened my eyes again, the room was quiet, the sun bleeding faint light into the corners. For a moment, I thought it was over. And then, from deep within the house, muffled but clear, the knocking began again. This time, it sounded like it was coming from inside the walls themselves. It started on a night when the air felt heavier than usual, the kind of thickness that lingers even with the windows cracked open. The room was dim, lit only by the weak glow of a desk lamp whose bulb had been flickering for weeks but never quite died. Shadows stretched along the walls like stains, refusing to stay still, as though the faint current of the night breeze wasn't the only thing that disturbed them. I was sitting at my desk, trying to ignore the static hum of silence that had replaced the comforting noise of the outside world. No cars, no footsteps, not even the whisper of wind brushing against the leaves. It was that silence that made the first knock sound louder than it should have been. A single, dull thud that seemed to echo through the hallway outside my room. Not sharp like a knuckle rapping against wood. It was softer, slower, almost deliberate, like someone pressing the weight of their hand into the door rather than tapping it. I froze, waiting for it to repeat. And it did. 3 slow knocks, evenly spaced, almost rhythmic. Each one vibrated faintly through the floorboards beneath me, as though it wasn't just on the door, it was in the house itself. The smell of dust grew stronger. It wasn't unusual, considering how old the place was, but there was a sour edge to it that hadn't been there before, like wood rotting quietly somewhere deep within the walls. I told myself it was probably nothing. Houses made noise. Creaks, knocks, settling wood. That's what I wanted to believe. But then it came again. 3 more knocks. Louder. My throat tightened. The air felt colder, as if the lamp's glow had been drained out of the room. I sat still, breathing as shallowly as possible, listening for any shift in sound beyond the pattern. But there was nothing else. No footsteps. No movement. Just the knock, steady and patient. I leaned back in my chair, straining to hear, and that's when I noticed something unsettling. My phone, resting face down on the desk, had lit up. No ringtone, no vibration, just the glow of the screen spilling across the wood. My heart stumbled when I saw it. An incoming call. No name, no number, just the words, unknown caller. The knocking stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the sound itself. It pressed into my ears, filling the room until I could hear the pounding of my own pulse. I didn't move. I didn't reach for the phone. I just stared at the light until it dimmed, and the room fell dark again. Relief seeped in for a moment, until the knocking began again. This time it was closer. Not at the front door. Not in the hallway. It sounded like it was against the wall right beside me, as if something had moved inside the house, inching toward me, dragging its presence from one surface to another. The vibration traveled up through the desk, rattling a glass of water I hadn't touched in hours. I could see the ripple in the liquid, perfectly timed with each dull knock. And then once again the phone lit up. Unknown caller. The knocks ceased instantly. The silence returned, hollow and suffocating. I felt trapped between the two, the sound that terrified me and the phone that somehow stopped it. I didn't answer. I couldn't. My hand hovered near it, trembling, but I couldn't bring myself to touch it. Instead, I waited it out. The screen dimmed, the glow vanished, and for a moment, I thought maybe it was over. But the knocking returned. This time, it didn't pause. It grew restless, uneven, pounding in different spots along the wall, then the floor, then the ceiling. Like hands searching for a way in or out. The smell of rot was stronger now, mixed with something metallic, like the tang of rust or blood. I covered my nose with my sleeve, but it clung to the back of my throat, making each breath harder. The phone lit again. Unknown caller. The knocking stopped mid-pound, cutting off like someone had silenced it with a switch. The timing wasn't coincidence. It couldn't be. I sat there for what felt like hours, caught in a loop. The knocking would begin, building in intensity, filling every surface of the room with its slow persistence. The phone would light up, and it would stop, over and over. The cycle didn't break. And yet, I refused to answer. The thought of pressing that screen, of putting the phone to my ear, filled me with dread so thick it made my hands go cold. Something inside me whispered that if I answered, I wouldn't just hear a voice. I'd be letting something in, something that had been waiting for me to respond. But the longer I resisted, the more relentless it became. The knocks weren't just dull thuds anymore. They scraped. Fingernails or claws, dragging across wood and plaster, trying to peel their way through. The lamp flickered harder now, dimming to the point that the shadows in the corners looked like holes, stretching deeper than the room itself. My chest was tight. My ears rang. Every sense screamed at me to do something. The phone lit again. This time, it didn't just display unknown caller. The screen pulsed brighter and brighter until the letters bled into one another, forming words that shouldn't have been there. Answer. Now, my breath caught in my throat. The knocking had stopped before the screen even lit, as if the thing behind it had grown impatient, choosing a new method. I could feel it waiting. The silence was unbearable. It wasn't just absence of sound. It was a void, like everything around me had ceased to exist except for me, the phone, and whatever lurked just beyond the walls. My hand moved before I realized it, hovering over the device, trembling so violently that I nearly dropped it. The screen seared white into my vision, demanding obedience. I pressed it. The moment I answered, the knocking stopped completely. Not a scrape, not a vibration, not a single sound. The silence was so absolute, it rang in my ears like pressure deep underwater. My body stiffened, waiting for a voice, for static, for anything at all. But there was nothing. I pressed the phone harder against my ear, listening. The silence wasn't empty. It was thick, textured, like the hiss of air leaking through a narrow crack. And beneath it, faint and distant, I could hear something else, breathing. Slow, ragged, matching the rhythm of the knocks that had haunted me. My stomach lurched. It wasn't on the phone. It wasn't in the house. It was both, inside the line and inside the walls. The realization sank like ice through my veins. I wanted to hang up, but my hand wouldn't move. My skin prickled as if 1,000 unseen fingers were tracing up my arms, holding me there. The breath on the line deepened, echoing not just in my ear, but inside the room. And then faintly I heard it, a whisper, not words, just the dry sound of lips parting, dragging across the speaker. The phone went dark in my hand. The call had ended. And in that exact moment, from deep inside the walls, the knocking began again. But now it was answering mine.